I never imagined a regular Saturday morning could flip into one of the craziest experiences of my life. I was standing in my driveway, sipping coffee, when I saw her, the woman I'd only heard about in whispered HOA nightmare stories, marching straight toward my garage like she owned every square inch of the neighborhood. My stomach dropped immediately. This wasn't some petty complaint or a casual knock. She was there to tow my truck from inside my garage. I blinked hard, wondering if maybe I was still half asleep. But no, she was already on the phone, waving her arms like she was directing traffic, shouting about violations and HOA authority. My chest tightened as I realized she genuinely thought she had the power to take my truck, the truck I'd spent months restoring. And the worst part was, I hadn't done a single thing wrong. The garage door creaked open like it sensed trouble, and her tow truck roared awake as if it were daring me to try stopping her. I bolted toward the garage, calling her name, but she didn't even acknowledge me. It was like I wasn't even there. She had the tow hook ready to swing, and the driver sat behind the wheel looking unsure, clearly wondering if any of this was even legal. I froze, torn between jumping in front of the truck or immediately calling the police. Neighbors peeked from their windows, stunned, and a thick tension settled over the street. Everyone knew something explosive was brewing, but no one knew what would ignite it. Everything happened in a blur. One moment she was at the edge of my garage, waving papers and pointing at my truck like it was contraband. The next, she was climbing into the tow truck, trying to drag my vehicle out from inside my own property. My stomach flipped. I had never seen someone so bold, so blatantly unconcerned with personal boundaries. My pulse hammered. Every passing second pushed my panic and anger higher. This wasn't just about a truck. This was about respect, ownership, and basic sanity. My hand shook as I dialed 911. There's a woman trying to tow my truck out of my garage. Yes, she's an HOA. I stuttered, trying to explain how absurd this whole situation was. The operator told me to stay calm and keep my distance, but calm felt impossible. I peeked around the corner, and she was shrieking now. At me, at the tow driver, at the universe. Her voice sliced through the morning like a siren, and I swear her fury was practically vibrating through the driveway. Then, in a twist I'll never forget, the tow driver shook his head, stepped out of the truck, and pulled out his phone. My stomach twisted. I expected her to argue, maybe even escalate things further. But instead, he called the police. My heart lurched. The woman froze, realizing for the first time that someone was actually challenging her. Her expression snapped from raging confidence to stunned disbelief, like it had never occurred to her that rules could apply to her. I barely breathed as I watched the standoff unfold, everything surreal and almost slow motion. I kept thinking, how did it get this far? How did an average HOA dispute turn into her trying to tow my truck from my garage? And as the driver held firm, phone in hand, I realized the real chaos was still coming. She wasn't the type to give up quietly, and neither was I. The tension stretched so tight even exhaling felt loud. She stormed around like a brewing thunderhead, while I tried to reestablish control on my own property. The tow truck engine rumbled again, and dread knotted in my chest. But this time, the driver didn't move at all. He wasn't following her orders anymore. An entire power dynamic shifted instantly. The moment felt like an unspoken showdown. My rights, her obsession with authority, and a tow truck driver suddenly holding the line. Time crawled. Every word, every step she took toward that vehicle made the entire situation feel even more unreal. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about towing a vehicle. It was about ego dominance, and HOA caring consumed by control. The cops were on the way. I was recording every second, and she paced like a cornered animal, muttering threats I couldn't quite catch. Neighbors filmed from behind curtains, capturing every bizarre moment. And I stood there, caught between anger, disbelief, and the desperate hope that officers would arrive before she actually succeeded in dragging my truck away. I had no idea what she was planning next, but one thing was certain. This was going to be a story none of us would ever forget. The sirens were still a few minutes away, yet those few moments stretched into what felt like hours. She whirled around, her face blazing with fury, jabbing her finger at the tow driver as if he'd personally insulted her ancestors. "You think you can just ignore my authority?" she shrieked, her voice trembling with insulted entitlement. Every syllable dripped with that special brand of arrogance that makes your skin crawl. My pulse thudded in my ears. I wanted to shout at her to get away from my property, but in her mind she was royalty, the ruling monarch of the HOA, and I was just some peasant who dared to park a truck in his own garage. She marched toward me, waving her stack of papers like a sword. I stepped back instinctively, nearly stumbling as she closed in. The tow driver remained steady, phone raised like a shield, though I could tell even he was rattled. He muttered something quietly, maybe trying to calm her down, but she wasn't interested in peace. Her gaze darted between the two of us, sharp and frantic, like she was hunting for weakness. She was a full-blown tempest, ready to break everything in her path. Then she crossed a line I couldn't have imagined. She leaned into my garage, reaching for the tow hook again, trying to latch it to my truck while barking at me to move aside. I froze, torn between stepping in and keeping my distance to avoid a physical confrontation. The nerve of it, someone trying to tow your vehicle from inside your own garage, sent a cold jolt through me. My heart pounded, and my grip tightened around my phone as I prepared to record everything. "Stop. You can't do that," I shouted, my voice cracking under the pressure. She acted like she couldn't even hear me, like my words were nothing but static in her ego-fueled performance. Her expression twisted with raw anger, and it was clear she had abandoned reason entirely. Every inch she moved toward that truck made the situation feel more explosive. Neighbors peeked through blinds, whispering nervously or just staring in stunned paralysis. The whole street felt like it knew this was spiraling beyond any normal HOA argument. The tow driver, shockingly, didn't fold. He shook his head firmly, speaking into his phone again, and I realized he was likely calling the police too, making sure they understood exactly what was happening. He refused to touch the truck without proper clearance, and that single act of defiance completely shook her. For a brief heartbeat, her confidence faltered, but then it snapped back with even more force as she redirected her rage toward me. "You're violating HOA codes," she screamed, pacing back and forth like a wind-up toy running out of control. "I'm enforcing the rules. You don't get to decide." Her words tumbled out fast, barely coherent, but the emotion behind them was unmistakable. She wasn't merely angry. She was fixated, consumed by the need to dominate. My garage, my truck, my entire existence had somehow become the battleground for her obsession. Then came a twist I didn't see coming. She yanked a tiny camera out of her purse like she was about to film an expose. I blinked in disbelief. Not only was she trying to tow my truck illegally, she was documenting me, probably planning to twist the footage into some wild HOA fantasy where I was the villain. My stomach sank. This wasn't just power, it was humiliation. By now, I could clearly hear sirens cutting through the distance, growing louder, slicing into the tension like a blade. Her movement sped up, frantic and desperate. She lunged toward my truck again, but this time the tow driver stepped in physically, blocking her with a firm arm. "Ma'am, that's enough. Police are on their way," he said coolly. His composure threw her into deeper rage. She spun on him, hurling threats that made my skin crawl. "You don't get it. You're supposed to follow my orders." "I'm with the HOA," she screamed. Her entitlement was off the charts. Every gesture, every sentence proved how unhinged this whole scene had become. This was no longer about a violation. It was about proving dominance, about crushing me in front of the entire neighborhood. Then, unbelievably, she tried to yank open the tow truck door while it was still running, apparently intending to force the driver to obey her. My jaw dropped. I shouted for her to stop, begged her to step away, but she was past the point of reason. Neighbors had come outside now, phones raised, some yelling at her to back off. Her bravado wavered for a second, but then she snapped back into that same terrifying unshakable. Her energy was relentless, each second feeling like a live wire ready to explode. She swung between lunging at my truck, screaming at me, and berating the tow driver with a stamina that seemed almost superhuman. The air itself felt charged, thick with tension. I felt cornered, powerless in the moment, but also fiercely determined. I wasn't about to let her take my truck or my dignity. Finally, the first police car rolled into view, lights flashing and engine purring. She froze mid-motion, a flicker of panic crossing her face. Instantly, the whole power dynamic shifted. The unmistakable presence of authority hit her like a wall, and I felt a small surge of relief. The tow driver stepped back, still gripping his phone, while she attempted to argue, to twist reality to her advantage. But the officers weren't buying it. My heart pounded as one of them stepped forward and spoke, voice cutting cleanly through the chaos. "Ma'am!" Step away from the vehicle. Her expression twisted into a mix of anger and disbelief. The neighborhood seemed to hold its collective breath. Whispers spread, phones raised, and I realized just how close we had come to a full-blown disaster. Even with law enforcement present, I knew the drama wasn't over. This wasn't just an ordinary HOA dispute. This was a Karen on a mission, and with an audience and authority now involved, her behavior was about to escalate in ways I couldn't predict. Every muscle, every motion screamed entitlement and rage, and I knew what came next would define the rest of this unbelievable day. The officer stepped fully onto my driveway, and I noticed a subtle change in her demeanor. Not rage this time, calculation. She forced a shaky smile, trying to cast herself as a victim. "I'm just enforcing HOA rules," she spat, as if repeating it enough times could make it true. But the officers weren't impressed. One glanced at me, then at the truck, nodding ever so slightly, clearly on the side of reality. For a moment, I dared to think she might finally relent. Her fists remained clenched, her chest heaving, but there was hesitation. Then she whipped out a stack of papers, waving them like a shield. "These are your violations," she barked, jabbing at me the truck, and even the driveway itself. The officers asked calmly to see the documents. Confidence faltered immediately. The papers were chaotic, handwritten notes, photocopies, conflicting dates, clearly thrown together in a frantic attempt to intimidate. Then the unexpected happened. One officer asked, "Did you actually authorize this tow?" Her face froze, lips parted, and I could almost see her scrambling to spin a story. "I thought the HOA could," she stammered, voice faltering. The officer shook his head firmly. "No, only the vehicle owner or a court order can authorize a tow. You cannot tow from private property." Relief washed through me, adrenaline slowly ebbing, but the drama wasn't fully over. Karen's composure collapsed. She shouted, waved her arms, tried to argue, but the officer simply stood firm. Then, in a bizarre turn, she pointed at the neighbors who had gathered, shouting accusations and trying to make me look like the aggressor. But no one fell for it. Phones captured every second, and the crowd stared at her in disbelief. Finally, one officer calmly asked a simple, piercing question. "Why are you doing this? Why risk everything over a truck?" Her eyes widened, caught off guard. For a brief second, the fury melted into hesitation. And then, almost inaudibly, she confessed, I needed to show them I have power, that I can enforce the rules." The truth hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't about the truck, rules, or property. It was about ego, control, and proving something she hadn't earned. Relief and disbelief washed over me. Everything suddenly made sense. Her audacity, shouting, obsession with dominance. She wasn't being reasonable because this was never about reason. It was about validation. The officers laid down the law. She could not legally tow my truck. She could not threaten me, and any further harassment would be treated as criminal. Her face crumpled. Fury, shame, disbelief all at once. With one last glare, she stormed back to her house. The tow driver finally exhaled, nodding at me. My neighbors murmured their amazement. My legs trembled, my heart still raced. But relief filled me. My truck was safe, my garage untouched, and the wildest HOA drama I'd ever witnessed was contained. As I closed the garage door, I laughed quietly, shaking my head at the chaos that had just ended. And yet a small part of me wondered, would she ever truly give up? Or would the next conflict be even more outrageous? But for that moment, what mattered most was standing my ground, knowing the law was on my side, and that a Karen who tried to bulldoze reality had finally been stopped. Exhaustion and triumph intertwined. The neighborhood resumed its rhythm, whispers lingering about the day Karen tried to tow a truck from a garage. And I smiled, thinking about the sheer audacity, the fear, the drama, and finally vindication. Some people crave power more than fairness, logic, or reason, but when faced head-on, armed with truth and persistence, even the most unhinged HOA Karen can be shown the limits of authority. That day, I learned something vital. Courage isn't about fists, it's about standing firm when chaos tries to rewrite reality. And my truck, garage, and sanity were living proof of that.